Welcome to Mindset Matters Book Club YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like to hear new book summaries.
Today, we are undertaking a deep dive into a question that I think hits painfully close to home for so many of us, especially when we realize we're trapped in a cycle that just doesn't make sense.
That we're sabotaging ourselves. The question is literally, why do I keep doing this?
And that is, of course, the title of the profoundly insightful book by licensed therapist Kati Morton. It's just a fantastic resource designed to help you, the listener, really understand the root causes of that exhausting cycle.
Our focus today is really on digging into her key insights, especially around this paradoxical nature of control.
Exactly. And what I love about this book is that it's part memoir, part therapeutic guide. She really opens up.
She does. She talks about her own intense breaking point, which happened in 2023, and that vulnerability. I mean, it just sets the tone for the whole book. It gives it so much credibility.
Absolutely. She realized her relentless work ethic, this constant need to be achieving, and her total refusal to rest or delegate.
Right? Just pushing past her own exhaustion, dismissing her own needs.
And she realized it all stemmed from something much deeper, a desperate need to manage her world.
To control it. And she was being driven by this toxic idea that so many of us have internalized.
Falling apart is a failure.
Ugh, yes. That we have to keep it together, not be a burden, manage everything. And for her, trying to control everything to make sure nothing went wrong, it just ironically caused massive resentment.
And deep, deep fatigue. She talks about snapping at her husband over something totally minor.
So the control wasn't even working. It wasn't keeping her safe or efficient like it was supposed to.
No, she wasn't just burned out from work. She was trapped in this endless, cyclical attempt to orchestrate her entire environment, her lists, her health, her relationships.
All to preempt failure or rejection or disappointment.
Yeah.
And the most frustrating part for her was that even with all her professional insight and personal therapy, she was still stuck in the same patterns.
That's what's so powerful, the admission that this intense need to manage and fix and adjust everything on the outside, it was suffocating her on the inside.
The energy she was using on control, on preventing chaos.
That was the chaos. Her efforts to feel safe were actually making her more anxious and more isolated than ever.
And that really defines our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack where this need for control even comes from, what's the origin story, and most importantly, explore the practical ways she suggests we can loosen our grip.
Without that terrifying feeling of free-falling. Because for someone who relies on control, letting go feels like an existential threat.
It really does. It feels like the real self-sabotage.
Let's dive in. Let's start at the beginning with the family blueprint. So the book establishes right away that to understand this whole self-control thing, you have to start by taking a serious and a non-judgmental look at the foundations laid in childhood.
Right, within the family.
Right.
And this concept of the relationship blueprint is, I think, where the real paradigm shift happens for a lot of people.
It is. The book argues that our family structure and the ways we learn to cope and get attention created this initial blueprint for all our future relationships.
It dictates what feels familiar, what feels routine, and therefore what feels comfortable.
Even if that familiarity is profoundly unhealthy, that's the critical part to really internalize.
Yeah.
If you grew up with, say, inconsistent love or conditional attention, or maybe you were made to feel like a burden when you expressed a need, your foundational sense of trust is it's shaky.
And the terrible irony is that later on in our adult lives, our jobs, our friendships, our romantic partners,
we find ourselves attracted to people or situations that mimic those exact traits, that inconsistency, that unavailability.
It's not because we consciously want pain. It's a subconscious thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
A preference for the pattern we already know how to navigate.
Exactly. Our brain equates familiarity with a strange kind of safety. And the author's own story really drives this home.
Tell us about that.
Well, her therapist pointed out this common thread in all her relationships. She kept dating men who mirrored the unreliability she experienced growing up. They were men who, required her to do all the work, go to them.
There was no balance, no compromise?
None. And she kept telling herself, relationships just take work. But in reality, she was repeatedly picking people who were never truly available.
So she was reinforcing her original trauma over and over again.
She was. She realized her picker wasn't properly calibrated. It was stuck on the frequency of inconsistency because that's what felt normal to her system.
Wow. And understanding that origin, that history, that's the first step. You can't change behavior if you don't know the wound it was designed to protect.
Absolutely. Which brings us to how this need for control actually develops from that blueprint. It comes from internalizing inadequacy.
Right. So as kids, when our parents are inconsistent or emotionally unavailable,
Yeah.
we don't have the context for it. We can't understand adult stress or mental health struggles.
We can't. So we just assume the instability, the unpredictability. It must be our fault. It must be rooted in something we did or didn't do.
If I were just better or smarter or quieter, then everything would be okay.
Precisely. We internalize it. And that is where the control drive takes root. We start striving for perfection, for high achievement, not because we love the task itself.
But because we're trying to control the conditions, we're trying to finally feel seen and heard and understood.
Which is a fundamental, vital developmental need that just wasn't being met consistently.
And this plays out in such interesting ways. The book calls it control through achievement and gives two really good contrasting stories from community members. Let's talk about Ruby first.
Okay, so Ruby, she grew up with these super high-achieving parents who were, well, they were physically and emotionally absent most of the time.
So the only time she got their undivided attention, their validation, their connection,
was when she brought home a perfect report card or won an award, some
Yeah.
external marker of success.
So she learned to equate her entire self-worth with what she could produce.
Yes. And this created a woman who was, on the outside, incredibly high-functioning, but on the inside, she was secretly miserable. A perfectionist, a workaholic.
Driven by this terror of being average.
Yeah.
Because to her, average meant invisible.
Exactly. And she really struggled in her relationships because, and this is the crazy part, regular, unearned, consistent attention actually scared her.
Wow. Because she only understood how to earn care.
Her whole life became this control superhighway, just running at this breakneck pace to feel minimally worthy.
Okay, so let's contrast that with Tara's story.
Right. So Tara's big shock was her parents' sudden, unexpected divorce. It created this massive internal instability for her.
And she vowed never to put her own kids through that.
So her control mechanism was an achievement. It was security through dependency. She sought out men who constantly showered her with attention and, crucially, needed her.
That gave her a sense of rock-solid security that she felt like she could orchestrate.
But the outcome was the same self-sabotaging pattern, just in a different package. She engineered security through codependency.
She ended up in a marriage where she was the sole provider, the sole self-starter, because her husband relied completely on her.
And she became deeply, deeply resentful. She realized she hadn't built a partnership. She had engineered a dependent relationship to guarantee he would never leave her. She was controlling the risk of abandonment.
Both of those stories just perfectly illustrate the pitfall of external fixes.
They do. We are biologically wired for connection. This is where we should probably bring in some of the science, like Dr. Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
So the theory explains that connection and safety, they activate a part of our nervous system called the ventral vagal complex. That's what's responsible for us feeling calm, social, and regulated.
And when we feel unsafe, like Ruby and Tara did in childhood, we drop down into our survival states.
Right, the sympathetic state, which is fight or flight, or the dorsal vagal, which is freeze or collapse.
And trying to control our achievements or other people, that's a fight response, isn't it? We're fighting for our survival.
It is. And when we rely only on these external fixes, hoping a partner will finally give us unconditional love, or waiting for an apology to finally move on, we're giving away our power to activate that calm, regulated state ourselves.
We become totally dependent on things we can't actually manage.
And when people inevitably fail us, it just reinforces that core belief. See, I'm not worthy of love or support. We keep searching outside ourselves when the power to regulate is inside.
So how do we get to that core belief? The book introduces a really practical tool for this, the downward arrow technique.
Yes, it's a cognitive technique. It forces you to move past the surface behaviors and the blame and just honestly look at the dynamics to find the real belief that's fueling everything.
It's an exercise in curiosity, not judgment.
Exactly. You take a controlling thought like, I have to check that email 5 times before I send it, and you ask yourself, if that were true, what would that mean about me?
And you just keep asking that question, going deeper and deeper with each answer until you hit the bottom.
Let's try it. So, I have to work hard to get love and attention. Okay, what does that mean about me?
It means I'm not worthy of love without working for it.
Okay, and what does that mean about you?
that just being myself isn't enough,
And what does that mean?
that I am not enough.
And that's it. That's the core belief that drives the entire system. I am not enough.
That's what the author discovered about herself, and it fueled her perfectionism, her competitiveness, her people-pleasing,
Yeah.
everything.
And just knowing that story, that deep belief, it doesn't fix it overnight, but it allows for some compassion. You stop blaming the behavior and start addressing the wound.
It's a shift from just managing behavior to actually healing, a necessary first step. So if that's the blueprint, let's look at maybe the most popular disguise this control drive wears: perfectionism. All right, so we've laid the foundation, this core belief of I am not enough. From there, perfectionism is. It's probably the most recognizable and, frankly, the most exhausting way that control shows up.
It's all about this idea that flawlessness is the key to worthiness, to happiness.
It's what the book calls the hustle for worth, this belief that you have to earn every single scrap of love or attention or success.
Yeah, and for the author, this went all the way back to her childhood, trying to earn her absent father's attention. She chased perfect grades, she excelled in sports, constantly hustling for her worth.
Convinced that if she fell short, if she was just mediocre, she'd be completely overlooked.
Exactly. And it's so important that we define trauma here the way the book does. It doesn't have to be some huge catastrophic event.
Right. Trauma is any upsetting, stressful event that just overwhelms our ability to cope.
And those childhood inconsistencies, they're often little traumas, small, chronic events that lead us to blame ourselves. We think, if I could just do it better, be nicer, be smarter, then the hurt wouldn't happen.
And that directly fuels this pursuit of control through perfection. We become compulsively nice, or we take on way too much, or we're always apologizing.
All is a control mechanism. We're trying to soothe our own inadequacy and, crucially, trying to preemptively control how other people see us and react to us.
The biggest problem here, though, is the impossible standard, perfection. It's elusive by definition.
It's an amorphous, subjective idea. The goalposts are always moving. You know, if you asked 100 people to define a perfect podcast, you'd get 100 different answers. You'd spend all your time chasing an unachievable ideal.
And there's a great quote from author Julia Cameron in the book, who said that chasing perfection actually highlights the worst in ourselves.
It does. It forces your internal gaze to focus only on failure, on mistakes, on all the ways you're falling short. That self-criticism is so draining, and it just reinforces the original belief that you're inadequate.
It's just exhausting. So to break that cycle, the book talks about making the shift to progress.
Yes, you have to consciously stop using perfection as the metric. Instead of asking, did I do this perfectly? You have to shift the internal question to something else.
Did this move me forward? Progress is the goal. It's incremental, it's achievable, and sometimes just taking that first messy step is a huge win.
And if you can't make that shift, you get stuck in what the book calls the sabotage loop.
What's that?
It's when you desperately strive for perfection while at the same time you're holding this deep belief that you don't even deserve the success that perfection is supposed to bring.
So it's an internal conflict. The desire to control the outcome is fighting with the belief that the good outcome is unsafe or undeserved.
Exactly. There's a story about a woman named Holly who wanted to start a business, but she just kept highlighting every tiny flaw in her plan, every reason she wasn't worthy, until she was completely paralyzed.
And no amount of outside praise or validation can fix that. You have to be the one to offer yourself that compassion.
Right. But when we start trying to change, when we delegate something or submit a good enough project, our anxious mind just goes into overdrive, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It starts spinning out all these terrifying what-ifs.
So the book offers a great cognitive exercise for this, practicing scenarios to disarm fear. It's a structured way to actually confront the fear instead of avoiding it.
So how does it work?
You start by running through the absolute worst-case outcome. It's uncomfortable, but you have to do it. So if your fear is asking a partner for something you need, the worst case might be they laugh at you, call you too much, and leave.
You have to really let your mind go there.
Yes. But then, immediately after, you force your brain to consider the best-case scenario. This probably isn't likely either, but it pushes back against the darkness.
So in that example, the best case is they immediately agree, tell you they've been waiting for you to ask, and shower you with validation.
And finally, and this is the most important part, you settle on the most likely case. This is about rational, realistic thinking.
For the person asking for a need, the most likely case is probably The conversation will be a little uncomfortable, maybe a bit clumsy, but if they're a loving partner, they'll stick around and figure it out with you.
Exactly. And that structured practice disarms the fear center in your brain because you've forced it to confront reality, which is almost always way less catastrophic than the thought loop.
It gives you an action plan based on what's likely, not what you're terrified of.
Right. And to start putting this into practice right away, the control challenge is to consciously aim for good enough on one small, low-stakes task each day.
So set a timer for 15 minutes to draft an email or clean a closet, and then
Yeah.
just have to stop.
And resist that powerful urge to over-edit or redo it. That sounds so simple, but for a real perfectionist, that is a Herculean task.
Oh yeah, the anxiety, the feeling of risk, that internal voice screaming that you're failing, it'd be so loud.
Which is exactly why the challenge has to start small. That little bit of intentional imperfection is where you start retraining your nervous system.
So if that's about controlling our work and our output, let's shift to how we try to control the emotional world around us. Let's talk about people-pleasing.
When we talk about people-pleasing, it can sound so benign, you know, like you're just being a good friend or a helpful partner.
Right. What's wrong with wanting to please people?
But as the book really stresses, it is fundamentally a controlling behavior. It's rooted in this deep need for safety, security, and maybe most of all, conflict avoidance.
And there's a neurological basis for this. The book talks about it as fawning, the survival response.
Yes, it's an instinctive, trauma-based survival mechanism where we just suppress our own needs, our own desires, our own opinions to actively manage the emotional states of other people.
We operate under this belief, which is often subconscious, that our safety, physical or emotional, depends entirely on keeping everyone around us calm and happy.
All to avoid abandonment or rejection. And this leads to a really profound paradox. The book calls people-pleasing a subtle form of manipulation by anxiety.
That sounds harsh, but it makes sense. It's not necessarily malicious.
Not at all. But the intention is what matters. We do everything to make others happy, not purely for their benefit, but mainly to ease our own internal anxiety and discomfort around their potential upset.
It's totally self-driven. And it leads to what the book calls self-abandonment. All our energy, our focus, it's all directed outward, and we're left completely depleted.
If you're someone who constantly feels drained, there's a really good chance you're engaging in this kind of emotional control.
And this thrives in what's called the problem of enmeshment. These are relationships that don't have clear psychological boundaries.
Right. Sometimes it's called emotional incest, which is a harsh term, but it describes when one person feels responsible for the other person's mood or their stability or their life choices.
It completely blocks healthy independence. You can't even tell where your feelings end and the other person's begin.
So the therapeutic answer has to be the boundary solution. And the book describes boundaries so well, they aren't walls to push people away.
No, they're parameters. They're what allow us to love ourselves and other people at the same time. They define mutual respect.
And crucially, boundaries are not about controlling what other people do. They are definitive statements about what we will do to take care of ourselves.
So a boundary isn't, you have to stop yelling at me.
No. A boundary is, if you start yelling, I will end this conversation and walk away. It puts the control back in your hands.
But when we start doing this for the first time, it's so easy to fall into the avoiding overcorrection trap. The pendulum just swings way too far.
Totally. The moment we realize people-pleasing is harmful, we might jump to the other extreme. There's a story about a woman, Amy, who got so focused on rigid self-care that she started neglecting her family and missing important events.
Which just leads to a whole new wave of guilt.
So the change has to be small and intentional. The author's own starting point was just consciously trying not to over-apologize.
Stopping herself from saying sorry for things that weren't her fault, like asking a question or just taking up space.
That small act interrupts the fawning mechanism.
For people who are very conflict averse, like the author describes herself, the book gives some really good advice on communicating. Because silent boundaries, like ghosting or just withdrawing, they're really corrosive.
They are. They build up pressure and they hurt relationships because the other person is just left confused. It's much healthier to communicate about the process itself.
You don't have to launch into a huge debate.
No, you can use scripts like, I'm working on managing my stress and I need to take a 30-minute break from this conversation to calm down. It's about your own self-management, not controlling their reaction.
Okay, this all sounds great in theory, but the biggest emotional hurdle for me seems like it would be the guilt of grieving.
It's huge. Because when you start setting healthy boundaries, especially in relationships that have been running on the fuel of your imbalance,
The selfish ones, the codependent ones,
they will sometimes end. And that loss is real.
you have to allow yourself to mourn that loss. The loss of the relationship, but also the loss of the old self who kept it going.
And trust that you're creating space for more authentic, balanced connections to come into your life.
It's like the price of admission to a healthier life.
It is. And to start practicing this shift right away, the control challenge is just a simple pause. Before you agree to any request, practice using a buffer phrase.
Like, let me check my calendar and get back to you, or I need a moment to think about it.
That pause is so crucial. It gives you the space to figure out if you're making the choice from a place of genuine desire and capacity, or if it's just obligation and anxiety.
And if the person pressures you after you ask for a moment, well, that's a pretty clear sign right there.
That's your boundary indicator, for sure.
So if these last sections were about control of our work and emotions, the next one is about the physical manifestation of it all, how we literally make ourselves smaller to feel safe.
It's amazing how subtle these control mechanisms can get. They can manifest in this need to minimize our psychological or even our physical presence just to feel safe and avoid that overwhelming feeling of being too much.
The fear of too much is so pervasive. And taking up space, it just means asserting our emotional and psychological presence.
Right, sharing our needs, our ideas, our real opinions, our full personality.
But because too much is totally subjective, there are no rules for it. We often preemptively shrink ourselves to fit into what we think other people want.
We'd rather just disappear into the background and be safe than stand out and risk getting hurt or rejected.
The book identifies 3 major root causes of shrinking, which I found really insightful.
Yeah, the first one is high empathy. If you're always being told you're too sensitive or you worry too much, you start to internalize that.
And you start self-silencing. You believe your deep feelings are taking up too much emotional oxygen.
The second is parentification. This is when a child is relied on for parental emotional support or adult responsibilities.
It quickly teaches them that their own needs, their hunger, their sadness, their playtime, are secondary. They're a burden. They take up too much space.
And the third root is neglect or trauma. If you grow up with your needs being overlooked or dismissed, you start to believe your feelings just aren't real or reasonable.
There's this heartbreaking story about Ellie, who restricted her food to get smaller, believing that if she was less of a physical inconvenience, her emotionally absent father might love her more.
That is just a devastating example of controlling the body to take up less space because you believe the space itself is the problem.
So how do we heal this? The author found a really significant path through the IFS revelation, or internal family systems. It's also called parts work.
For listeners who are new to IFS, it's a model that suggests our psyche is made up of different subpersonalities or parts, each with its own feelings and intentions. The goal isn't to get rid of them, but to integrate them.
And for someone struggling with control, understanding their parts can be revolutionary.
It can. The author realized her urge to shrink came from hiding certain parts of herself. She had this reliable, overworked, hyper-competent manager part that she showed the world.
The one who controlled her success and efficiency.
But she was actively hiding her exiled part, the emotional, messy, unpredictable teenage self who felt everything so intensely.
And that part was labeled too much and embarrassing by her internal system.
So the healing requires communicating with that exiled part, acknowledging its pain, and accepting that emotional expression is actually okay, resisting that belief that she had to disappear.
It's like learning to be a good parent to those hurting parts of yourself.
Exactly. So the solution isn't to try to take up less space, which is impossible anyway, but to learn how to make room for our authentic, integrated self. And that starts with self-discovery.
This means intentionally spending time alone, taking self-dates, going on longer walks, just having an uninterrupted shower.
You have to build a relationship with your own true self. If you're always relying on other people for distraction or validation, you never learn who you are without those external mirrors.
And we also have to challenge false beliefs. The author realized she had dismissed things, like snowboarding, for years based on some old bias she picked up from someone else.
And when she finally tried it, she realized how many assumptions she'd adopted about herself that just weren't true. We have to be open to new things to strip away those old ideas and find our real passions.
So this is all about expansion. The control challenge for this section is to choose one expansion challenge for the week.
Maybe speak up in a meeting without minimizing your language. No, just, or maybe. Or make a bold decision without asking everyone for their opinion.
Or even just practice a still exercise, like medication. where you simply exist without having to do anything.
Intentionally push back against that urge to shrink and force yourself to be present.
If these control mechanisms are all designed to prevent pain, then it seems inevitable that we'd start looking for ways to avoid feeling anything at all. Which brings us to empathy and numbing out.
So as we touched on earlier, highly empathetic people often struggle a lot because their boundaries are so porous. This leads to emotional overload, burnout, and this necessary but ultimately really harmful need to numb out.
Right. Empathy is a wonderful trait, but it can become toxic empathy when we completely lose the ability to tell the difference between our own experience and someone else's.
It leads directly to burnout and self-denial. We tell ourselves, oh, someone else always has it worse, which is a perfect control tactic to invalidate our own pain so we don't have to deal with it.
The book calls this emotional contagion. We catch other people's feelings like a virus.
The author's example of absorbing her husband's bad mood after a frustrating phone call is so relatable. We just surrender the driver's seat of our own emotional experience.
We become emotionally powerless. We confuse feeling for someone with feeling like someone.
Right. And this heightened sensitivity is often related to being a highly sensitive person, HSP, which affects about 15–20% of the population. The book uses the acronym DO-E to summarize the key features.
So D is for depth of processing. HSPs take longer to assess and internalize things.
O is for overstimulation. They notice everything and get overwhelmed quickly.
E is for emotional reactivity. They just feel emotions more intensely.
And S is for sensitivity to subtleties. They're highly attuned to nuance, to tone, to nonverbal cues.
This means they need dedicated time alone in quiet spaces to recharge. If they don't control their environment to get that rest, they'll inevitably try to control their internal state instead.
And when that internal state is overwhelmed, we reach for distractions. This is numbing out, the emotional escape.
We use whatever is accessible. Endless scrolling, overeating, overworking, self-harm, shopping.
And overfunctioning is a really sneaky one because it's actively praised by our hustle culture.
Right. You get to feel virtuous and productive, but you're really just using that hyper-productivity to avoid sitting with difficult emotions. It is a fast track to burnout.
And the cost of this avoidance is so high. Numbing out doesn't make the emotion go away. It just shoves it into the trunk, as a quote from Tim Robbins in the book suggests.
And those emotions just accumulate in there as unresolved tension. They manifest as physical symptoms, chronic pain, fatigue, anxiety, or eventually they erupt as these totally inappropriate emotional outbursts. The pressure cooker has to release steam.
To counteract this, we have to recognize that these intense feelings are temporary. Dr. Jill Bolt Taylor's 90-second rule is a great cognitive anchor for this.
What's the rule?
Her research found that the actual chemical surge of an emotion, the physiological response that floods your body, only lasts for about 90 seconds before it naturally dissipates.
That's a profoundly powerful realization. So any feeling that lasts longer than 90 seconds
is being maintained by our conscious or subconscious choice to keep replaying the thought that triggered it. We're refiring the chemical circuit.
Knowing that is a huge motivator to just sit with an intense feeling. Knowing that if you don't engage the thought, the physical sensation will pass.
So we have to focus on getting better at feeling. We need to learn to identify and engage with our emotions and see them as motivators for action, not something that will paralyze us.
For people who feel really numb, the book suggests starting by identifying your go-to numb-out behavior, the back door you use to escape, and trying to find the underlying emotion it's protecting you from.
Or, if that's too hard, you can use media strategically. Listen to music that you know makes you sad, or watch a show that triggers certain emotions. Intentionally stimulating feelings in a safe, contained way can help retrain your system that feeling isn't dangerous.
And finally, to manage that toxic empathy specifically, we can use the CBT fact check.
Yes, it's a great tool. When a strong, overwhelming emotion pops up, especially when you're around other people, you pause and ask 3 questions.
1. What actually happened here, factually?
2. Do I have direct, tangible control over this situation?
And 3, the big one. Is this emotion mine, or did I absorb it from someone else?
That process creates the distance you need to disarm that emotional contagion and make sure you're only taking responsibility for what is actually yours.
We've talked about shrinking and numbing, and both of those are rooted in this deep discomfort with strong, messy emotions. And often, the strongest feeling we try to control is anger.
Right, and the book really repositions anger. We usually see it as this inherently negative thing, but she frames it as a necessary protective emotion, a
Huh.
crucial call to action.
It's a biological warning system. It signals that a boundary has been crossed, or an injustice has happened, or a need is being neglected.
It's what fuels the evolutionary fight response.
Yeah.
It gives us the energy and drive to advocate for ourselves and fix the imbalance.
But the real conflict is in how we express it. The book talks about anger in versus anger out.
We often control ourselves so rigidly because we're terrified of the uncontrollable nature of anger out, the yelling, the aggression, the lashing out.
But a lot of people who struggle with control turn that anger inward. That's anger in. It manifests as self-criticism, self-harm, passive aggression.
There's a story from a woman named Justine who said self-harm was the safe way to be angry in her world, a private control mechanism. But internalizing it still stops you from addressing the real issue.
And it's so important to recognize that anger can often just be a protective cover for more vulnerable feelings like deep hurt or shame or fear.
Oh, absolutely. It feels so much safer and more powerful to feel rage than to feel exposed and weak by admitting you're in pain.
So the goal isn't to get rid of anger. It's to translate it. We have to distinguish between anger versus assertion.
Yes, anger is impulsive. It's reactive, often destructive. Assertion is the mindful, constructive choice to use that protective energy to advocate for yourself clearly, to promote resolution without attacking the other person.
Assertion requires control over how we react, not if we feel the emotion.
And if we can't use that energy constructively, we often end up with misplaced anger. When we feel wronged, but we can't express anger at the source, our boss, a difficult client, we displace it onto a safer target.
This is when you snap at your partner, or yell at a customer service agent, or get enraged by minor traffic.
Recognizing that pattern is so vital. It stops us from hurting the people we trust, and it redirects us to the true, often inconvenient source of our frustration.
To manage these strong emotions and turn anger into assertion, we have to build resilience, which is just the ability to weather life's ups and downs without collapsing or lashing out.
And the book really stresses that resilience is built through consistent foundational self-care.
The acronym HALT is the suggested internal check for this. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired.
Before you react, especially if you feel like you're about to explode, check those 4 core needs. Are you physically depleted?
Prioritizing the basics, drinking water, eating a meal, getting enough sleep, it ensures our nervous system is regulated enough to handle those intense reactions constructively.
The ultimate control challenge here is to practice listening to anger. Before you react impulsively, just pause and ask the question, what is this anger trying to protect me from?
That shifts anger from being this feared, uncontrollable enemy into a guiding resource. It tells you exactly where your boundaries are weakest and where you need to put your attention.
Which leads us right into the concept of defense mechanisms themselves, the control systems that keep us from being truly seen.
So control mechanisms or defense mechanisms, they exist because they were necessary protector parts at some point in our lives.
Right. But as adults, they often become these huge barriers to the one thing we crave most, which is meaningful connection.
The author uses this fantastic metaphor, buffer fishing. She realized that on the inside, she was really sensitive and vulnerable.
But whenever that vulnerability was threatened, whenever a difficult conversation was on the horizon, she would metaphorically push people away by puffing up the spines of her defensiveness.
And this often just meant choosing avoidance over resolution. She'd cut ties with partners or friends, rather than have the necessary, difficult conversations that actually lead to growth.
Puffer fishing isolates you. It guarantees safety from pain, but at the cost of any genuine depth.
And this is directly linked to toxic independence, insisting on doing everything alone, hating group projects, refusing help.
It's a powerful defense against disappointment or having to rely on other people. The logic is simple. If I rely on no one can fail me.
But the cruel irony is that it causes extreme stress, isolation, and deep resentment. The book calls it an autoimmune disorder that attacks our relationships. It's meant to protect us, but it just ends up eroding our well-being.
The book also reminds us of a few common defenses we all use unconsciously. Intellectualization is a huge one, thinking instead of feeling.
Like researching the sociological history of divorce, instead of just letting yourself grieve a breakup.
Exactly. Others are repression or denial, just refusing to acknowledge painful truths. Displacement, taking anger out on the wrong person, like we just talked about.
A reaction formation, which is acting the complete opposite of what you really feel. That's the aggressive use of the fake it till you make it strategy.
It's so vital that we see these as protector parts. They exist because at some point we were hurt when we were open and vulnerable.
So to move forward, we have to figure out the fear that's underneath the defense, the wound we're running from, instead of just judging the urge to be defensive.
Because ultimately what we are all fighting for is the value of being known. Meaningful, restorative connection is built on 3 components.
Feeling seen, recognized for who we are and our inherent value, not just our achievements.
Feeling heard, listened to with full attention, where the other person is listening to learn, not just to reply.
And feeling understood. Having someone with an empathetic knowledge of our inner world.
These feelings are biologically restorative. They activate that calm, safe, ventral vagal system. But you can't get them without vulnerability.
Vulnerability is the only currency that these deep, authentic relationships will accept.
It is. It's that terrifying leap of showing our true, imperfect selves despite the risk of pain or rejection. Isolation feels safer in the short term, but it prevents us from ever experiencing the deep affirmation of being accepted completely.
Which is what our nervous system desperately needs.
The control challenge here is to practice intentional, small vulnerability. When someone gives you feedback or you feel that need to argue, just pause and ask yourself, am I trying to control how they see me? Or am I trying to control how I feel about myself?
And then choose one small moment, share a real messy feeling, or admit you don't know something, just to resist that familiar urge to put up the spines.
We've gone from the root cause to the defense mechanisms. Now let's talk about the hardest part, making the change stick and embracing the messy journey of growth.
The final stages of change are often the most challenging, aren't they? Because you have to address this fear of losing your old identity and accept that growth is, well, it's just not a straight line. It's chaotic.
Absolutely. And the fear of being othered or rejected is so powerful that we often lose ourselves to fit in. We change our interests, we censor our opinions, we adopt personas just to maintain relationships that are often pretty superficial.
And the long-term consequence is that you feel profoundly trapped and isolated because the connection is based on a version of you that isn't even real.
This isn't just psychological, it's biological. The biology of belonging reminds us that our nervous system is wired for connection. Feeling isolated activates the stress response, that fight or flight mode.
And genuine connection activates the parasympathetic system, which promotes calm and healing and safety.
But here's the paradox we have to confront. The urgency to connect, which is driven by that stress and fear of being alone, often gets in the way of forming real, slow, trusting bonds.
Rushing into connection is a control tactic.
It is. So the first step to finding our authentic community has to be internal. We have to figure out who we are first. What are our values, our passions, our non-negotiables, before we go looking for connection?
Taking those self-dates or charting your core values is essential to reclaiming that self-knowledge.
But this path to change is inevitably blocked by emotional inertia. Depression and being stuck creates this illusion that it's safer to stay in a known, painful pattern than to risk the uncertainty of growth.
The weight of despair just makes the effort of change feel completely pointless.
And when we do manage to adopt healthier ways of being, when we stop people-pleasing or we set a boundary, we have to pause and process grieving the past self.
We lose that old identity,
Yeah.
the codependent rescuer, the hyper-achieving machine, the self-deprecating one who makes everyone comfortable.
That loss is real, and it has to be mourned. You can't fully move forward if you're still holding on to the security blanket of who you used to be, even if it was a painful identity.
One of the hardest control mechanisms to disarm is what the book calls the earning trap.
Oh, this one is huge. We delay our own happiness because we believe deep down that we have to earn the right to feel content or joyful through external success.
Job titles, money, achievements.
And this belief is so strongly reinforced by a culture that values hard-earned achievement above everything else.
It makes self-care feel frivolous or selfish. We have to actively retrain ourselves to see joy in self-care, not as rewards we have to earn, but as fundamental rights we deserve just by being human.
And finally, the biggest, scariest control mechanism to let go of is the need for certainty. We have to choose to trust the process, even when it feels messy and chaotic and terrifyingly uncertain.
The author compares it to driving on a dark, winding road. The headlights only show you the next little bit of the path as you go. You can't see the final destination yet.
Sustainable change happens through those intentional, imperfect steps you take in the dark.
So the book gives us one final, brilliant control challenge to help retrain our nervous system to feel safe around positive emotions.
Yes. Spend a week actively celebrating your accomplishments, even the smallest ones. When someone gives you a compliment, resist that urge to deflect it or minimize it.
Instead, you have to practice sitting with that positive emotion, pride, excitement, happiness, for at least 30 seconds.
Your brain is probably wired to dismiss those feelings really quickly because positive emotion can feel very vulnerable. Forcing yourself to sit in the joy retrains your nervous system to see those feelings as safe, to integrate them into your new authentic identity.
So after all of this, what does it all mean for you, the listener? We've really uncovered that this fight for control is almost always a desperate, but ultimately exhausting attempt to avoid vulnerability.
It all stems from those old family blueprints and internal traumas. It's an illusion of safety.
And letting go doesn't mean giving up or abandoning responsibility. It means creating space for genuine connection, for sustainable growth, for authenticity to finally come into your life.
It's a profound shift from frantically managing the external world to genuinely trusting your own internal resilience and just allowing life to unfold with all its complexity and imperfection and surprise.
The author's own journey confirms this. Her biggest career successes, her most fulfilling relationships, they came from completely unexpected places, precisely when she stopped trying so desperately to control every outcome.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you to carry forward. If control is truly the voice of fear trying to keep you small and predictable,
What unexpected achievements or fulfilling, messy, beautiful paths are you currently blocking in your life, simply by trying too hard to follow a script you wrote years ago?
keep moving forward one small, imperfect step at a time. Thank you for listening to this deep dive.